Alright guys, so now that we know the difference between passive scanning and active scanning, let's head over to the options so we can configure the scanner to work exactly how we want. So just like the spider, I'm just going to go top down and explain what all of these mean. Some of them are pretty confusing, so let me go through and hopefully by the end you guys are going to know exactly how to tweak the scanner to perform just how you want it to. So the first one is pretty much detail about your insertion points, where you want to attack, URL parameter values. These are just your basic regular values in the URL query string. The body parameter values, these are the areas such as, and pull up the site again, such as the form elements, anything in your body basically. Maybe there's a file upload button so you can do something like mess with the file name or file spoofing. So anything inside your body, that's what that means. Cookie parameter, of course you know what that is, in case you want to inject any weird values into your cookies. The parameter name, so sometimes you know that a website is going to expect to accept certain parameters, name, ID, whatever web page you're on, it has an expected number and type of parameters to accept. So sometimes what we can do is we can add additional weird parameters, and since the server doesn't expect this, it may cause some weird issues, vulnerabilities. So that's what parameter name is if you ever want to change the actual parameters that you're trying to inject. HTTP headers, those are the headers. AMF string parameters. AMF is actually a binary format, and it's used a lot with XML and like action script objects. So that's what that is. REST style URL parameters. Of course, those are REST style URL parameters. Now, this right here, change parameter locations. What this does is, let's say that you pass a bunch of parameters through the query. Well, what you can do is you can actually take those that were supposed to be passed through the query string or the URL, and you can actually stick them in the cookie. So if you want to do that, it goes take the parameters from the URL and throw them into the cookie. Now, why would you want to do this? Well, sometimes the web app is only going to check or validate those URL parameters. Anything that gets through the cookie, it just automatically accepts and doesn't really validate. So this is going to take a little longer because you're going to have to make more requests, but it's a pretty cool way to bypass some filters this way. So I'm going to leave that unchecked by now, and now this one right here, use nested insertion point. A nested insertion point is whenever you have a parameter that contains some weird encoded data like base64, well, whenever you decode that encoded data, it might turn into something like JSON or whatever it was decoded into. Now with that JSON data, there can be insertion points that we can inject into. So while before we can't inject directly into base64, but we can inject into the decoded data. So that's what this does right here. This is pretty obvious, maximum insertion points per request. Now the reason that you want to limit this is because if it's too high, then your scanner can just take a lot longer. So it's pretty much just for performance. This is the max number, of course, of insertion points, as you can see. Now, there's also going to be certain types of parameters that you're going to want to skip over. Why is this? Well, let's say, for example, we started injecting weird values into our session ID. Now, we know that our session ID is one of the reasons that we're able to stay logged into websites. We don't really want that to change. If we start messing with it, then it's probably going to boot us off the website and we're not going to be able to continue our test. So I say, you know what? Whenever you're trying to inject stuff and mess up the website, skip over this one because, we don't want you to boot us off and mess up our test. Now, as you can see, the difference between this top one and bottom one are these are the server side injection tests, and these down here are the client side. Now, client side, you usually don't want to have too many in here because they are fast anyways, because we don't have to connect to a server. We can just run those all on our own computer. But anyways, that's the difference between these and these down here. Now this active scanning engine, this is easy. It's pretty much the exact same as our spider. Usually you want to keep these the same default values for the best performance. And this right here, active scanning optimization. This obviously has to deal with the optimization, in other words, the speed or performance of your scanner. Now, if you're like, alright, scan speed, do I want it to go fast or do I want it to go slow? Why wouldn't I always pick fast? Well, they actually have a reason for this. So what your scanners are going to do, as you already know, is it's going to take every injection point and run a bunch of tests on it. Now, if you want to run as many as you possibly can and be very thorough, then of course it's going to take a longer time. But the benefit is it's more thorough. It does more checks. If you just want to run some of the more likely ones, you can choose fast. You usually want to put this at normal because it gives you a pretty good median in between being thorough and not taking forever. Now, scan accuracy, this is kind of weird whenever you're first starting out. Now, a lot of problems that these scanners have, not only Burp Suite, but any type of vulnerability scanner, they generate a lot of false positives. In other words, it's going to tell you that it found a vulnerability, but there really isn't one. So, one way that we can combat this is whenever it thinks it finds a vulnerability, we can have it run another check to test again. Now, the bad part about this is, okay, whenever you test again, A, it takes more time, and B, what can happen is if it tests it again and it says, you know what, we actually got a different result this time, then it can say, okay, you know what, that probably means that this isn't an actual vulnerability, and for this reason, I know it sounds kind of weird, but it won't report it because it doesn't think it's an actual vulnerability, even though it is one. Just because we get different results back doesn't mean there's a vulnerability there. So it's kind of weird, but just real quick on these tutorials, minimize false negatives. This means give me all the results back, all the issues. However, the bad thing about this is there might be some false positives. Now, normal is just a mix between these two. Minimize false positives, which this means is it's not going to return as many potential issues, but the ones it does return, they're most likely definitely be legit. So I'm going to leave that on normal since it's a nice median in between. This use intelligent attack selection, what this is going to do is it's going to skip over any injections that it thinks are irrelevant. And it actually does a really good job of this, and it helps speed up the scanner a lot. So I recommend leaving that checked. Now down here, this is actually, looks like a pretty complex area, but this is actually one of the easiest. Active scanning areas, what injections do you want to test for? Now, of course, each additional test that you have, it's going to mean more time that your scanner takes to complete. Now, another thing that you probably want to do is say that you're trying to attack a website and you know that it doesn't use a MySQL database. Well, you might want to uncheck MySQL specific tests to save you time because A, it's going to, like I said, waste your time and also slow down the performance of your entire scanner. Now, passive scanning areas, again, same thing. This is the active scanning areas, active scanning injections that you want to test. Passive scanning, we already talked about the difference between active and passive. Now, static code analysis, all this means is how you want to analyze executable code. And what this excludes is just like your plain old regular source code. So it's how you want to analyze these for issues, insecurities, and there you go. So now that we know what all the options are, let me show you a quick little demo of, let's say we want to do live scanning first. So I'm going to say use sweet scope. In other words, it's only going to passively scan anything only if it's in my scope right here. So for example, when I go to another website, then it's not going to worry about those. So I'm going to click use sweet scope, and then I'm going to go and start browsing this site. So I'm browsing and doing my thing, and behind the scenes, what Burp is doing is it's passively scanning these web pages. So let's go hop back in Burp and look at results and check it out. Already it found a bunch of issues. So if you expand this, it says, okay, on the login page, there's a clear text submission of password. That means anyone sitting in the middle is going to be able to read your password and log into your account. And the other issues, again, they're color coded, which is pretty cool. Password field with autocomplete text. Obviously, you don't want your password to pop up whenever someone just clicks their little mouse in there. So there you go. That is what live passive scanning is. Again, I'm going to turn that off because I really don't want it running during my tutorials. Or, like I said, what you can do is you can go into your target sitemap and choose to actively scan one of these or an entire directory. So say for example I want to scan, let's just scan this directory real quick. So right click it, actively scan this branch, and this little box just gives you a few more options of how exactly you want to scan it. These look good. If you want to say, okay, I really don't want to, scan certain types of files like JPEGs or PNGs, I'm just going to leave them default by now. Next. Okay, looks good. In the scan queue, you can see all of the items that are currently being scanned. Now, I have this paused, so that's why everything says waiting. If all of yours say waiting, then you can just right click and hit resume scanner. And also, I'm going to uncheck automatically delete finished items. And what this does is, if you have that on, whenever a page gets done scanning, for example this one right here, it'll automatically delete it from the list. And if you have like a bunch of finished ones like this and you want them to delete automatically, leave that on. But again, you have a bunch of information, and this color coding is the same as before. Whenever it has black, it means it found some information that you could potentially exploit. Whenever it's red, it means it found a vulnerability that is really bad for the web owner. And whenever it's blank, it means, okay, this site is probably good, couldn't find too much on that. So over in your results, check out how fast that happened. That was stinking awesome. Look at all the results it made. Pretty sweet. Alright, so in your results, if you want pretty much a generic overview of the entire project, you can just click the main directory, or you can sift through each directory or page manually and look at all of the different types of vulnerabilities that it found. So there you go. That's your basics on how to use the scanner actively and passively, and also how to configure it to behave exactly how you want. Pretty sweet. In the next video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to use the intruder. Dun dun dun.